Hikers are disappearing under eerily similar conditions. Same time of day, same type of terrain, same items left behind. Search teams keep missing what later appears in plain sight. These cases were treated as separate incidents until the details were placed side by side. That's when the pattern became impossible to ignore. Files that read the same way. County reports and Park Service notes tend to begin with routine facts. A name is written once, then repeated in headers. An age is placed beside a hometown. A date is tied to a trail segment, a drainage, a ridge, or a parking area. The language is plain, built for handoffs between people who may not know each other. Times are recorded in short blocks. Last seen becomes the central phrase, followed by who said it and where they were standing. The rest of the page often looks like logistics, weather, light conditions, radio traffic, search assignments, and when a plan changed, those pages do not read like stories. They read like work. Even so, the same elements appear again and again across different parks and different years. A group stops for a moment. Someone steps behind trees. Someone goes ahead by a short distance. Someone leaves the trail for privacy. The file then widens quickly, moving from one family's account to the kind of language used by Incident Command. On the afternoon of the 14th of June 1969, Dennis Lloyd Martin, 6 years old, disappeared near Spence Field in Great Smoky Mountains National Park during a family trip from Knoxville, Tennessee. The setting was open grass bordered by steep slopes and timber, with the state line and the Appalachian Trail running along the ridge. The adults later described a short play moment with children at the edge of the trail. Dennis and other boys planned to surprise the adults by hiding. The boys separated for only a brief span, and that separation is treated in the record as the final confirmed sighting. In the park file, details are held without ornament. The time of day is included. The terrain is described with practical words about ravines and heavy cover. The first response begins as a localized search by family and nearby campers, then expands to rangers and organized teams. The scale becomes measurable, a wide area assigned, hundreds of people brought in, and search days counted across a calendar. The record does not argue with itself. It just accumulates actions and locations, then shows when the search is reduced and later closed. A different kind of file comes from a long-distance footpath rather than a national park. Geraldine Jerry Lage, a 6-year-old hiker from Tennessee, went missing on the Appalachian Trail in Maine on the 22nd of July, 2013. Reports and later summaries describe her leaving the trail briefly to use the bathroom and becoming disoriented in dense woods. The description remains simple: an experienced hiker, a short step-off route, and then no return to the treadway. The notes that became public later were not written for an audience. They were messages that did not send, along with a few dated entries. The key geographic facts are handled the same way agencies handle them in other cases, by distance and jurisdiction. Her remains were found in October 2015 in Reddington Township, Maine, after more than 2 years, and the medical examiner identified the death as accidental, tied to lack of food and water and environmental exposure. The detail that stays with officials is not dramatic. It is the kind that changes a search map. The campsite was off the trail and concealed by vegetation, in an area that had already seen effort from multiple agencies and volunteers. Another set of documents comes from Mount Rainier National Park in Washington, where the language is current and shaped by press updates. In October 2020, National Park Service announcements described an active search for missing hiker Sam Dubol. The statement lists the machinery of modern response: park rangers, volunteer mountain rescue, K9 units, drones, and helicopter crews. The effect is procedural. Resources are named because that is what the public needs to know, and because those names describe the kind of terrain involved without directly stating it. NAMUS, which functions as a national missing persons database, records the case with the same essential fields seen elsewhere: identity, date, and the plan for the outing. The wording is careful and brief. It does not speculate about what happened. It fixes the point where expectation failed, the moment when a person did not return as planned, and then hands the rest to investigators and search coordinators. Across these records, the calmness is structural rather than emotional. The paperwork is designed to reduce a complex event into a shape that can be managed. A disappearance becomes an intersection of time, last known location, terrain type, and the interval before someone raises an alarm. The same is true whether the subject is a child near a ridgeline meadow in 1969, or an older hiker on a long trail in 2013, or a missing backcountry visitor in 2020. What stands out on close reading is how often the first description contains a small, ordinary movement. A person is present, then briefly not seen. A group believes they are still together, then realizes they are not. A planned return time passes. The shift from missing to search happens quickly, and once that shift occurs, the language becomes consistent. Points checked, routes walked, weather monitored, air support requested or grounded, teams rotated in and out. In many files, quoted language appears in short fragments, usually attached to a specific purpose. A family member's statement is used to anchor the last confirmed moment. An agency line is used to establish what was deployed. A medical finding is used to close uncertainty around cause. The quotes do not build a narrative arc. They function like coordinates. The record must remain factual, while the subject remains absent. Search areas can be expanded, reworked, or narrowed. The trail itself stays in place. The forest cover stays thick. Water runs where it runs. A name stays written in ink. The rest of the case sits in updates and in the gaps between them. How search maps are drawn. When a person is reported missing in a park or wilderness area, the first document created is usually not a narrative report. It is a map. This map may begin as a printed trail diagram with handwritten marks, or as a digital base layer pulled into a geographic information system. Its purpose is limited. It records where the person was last confirmed to be, when that confirmation occurred, and what terrain surrounds that point. Everything that follows is built outward from this initial frame. In Great Smoky Mountains National Park, records from June 1969 show that the search for Dennis Martin began with a tight radius around Spence Field. Rangers marked the Appalachian Trail corridor, nearby clearings, and the immediate downhill slopes. The terrain there drops quickly into drainages, and those features were outlined early because gravity and water movement are standard considerations in lost person searches. Searchers were assigned by section, with instructions to move downslope, check creeks, and call out at regular intervals. The map was adjusted repeatedly as days passed and no trace was found. These early maps were drawn by hand and updated in stages. Helicopter flight paths were added when air support became available. Locations where clothing or other objects were reported were noted, even when those reports were later determined to be unrelated. The map did not suggest why the child disappeared. It only showed where people had already looked and where they had not. More recent cases show the same process, though the tools have changed. When Geraldine Largay was reported overdue in July 2013 on the Appalachian Trail in western Maine, the Maine Warden Service and other agencies created digital search grids. Her last known point was tied to a specific trail segment near Poplar Ridge Lean-To. From there, planners divided the surrounding forest into squares based on distance, slope, and travel difficulty. Teams were assigned to individual grids, and each completed area was marked as cleared. Official summaries later released by the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife note that search coverage focused heavily on the trail itself and nearby drainages. Aircraft flew over sections of forest, and ground teams followed established routes outward. The assumption embedded in the map was not a theory but a statistic. Most lost hikers are found within a short distance of their last known location. That assumption shaped the early layout. As days passed without results, the map expanded. Additional grids were added beyond the initial radius. Still, the trail corridor remained the central axis. Areas far from it were marked as lower priority because reaching them required significant bushwhacking, and no evidence suggested movement in that direction. This prioritization was recorded on the map through color coding and notes, not through written explanation. When Largay's remains were discovered in October 2015, they were located less than 2 miles from the trail, in dense forest that had been searched multiple times. Investigators later acknowledged that the campsite was difficult to see from the air and from the ground due to vegetation. That fact did not require interpretation. It simply required updating the map to show that a previously searched area still contained relevant ground. In Mount Rainier National Park, search maps from the 2020 disappearance of Sam Dubal followed similar logic. The National Park Service released statements confirming that teams were working specific drainages and trail systems, including areas near the Carbon River and surrounding backcountry routes. Helicopter search zones were defined by elevation bands and weather windows. When snow or fog limited visibility, those areas were temporarily marked as unavailable and revisited later. These maps were living documents. Each day's operations briefing began with a review of what had been covered and what remained. Completed sections were shaded or labeled. New information, such as a possible sighting or a piece of gear found elsewhere, prompted adjustments. The map did not become more detailed because of emotion or urgency. It became more detailed because more information was added. Search mapping follows standardized guidance. In the United States, many agencies rely on principles developed by search and rescue organizations and law enforcement. These principles include defining a last known point, establishing a probability area, and deploying resources according to terrain and survivability. These terms appear in training manuals and after-action reports, not in press releases. On the map, they appear as boundaries, arrows, and notes. Weather data is often layered onto search maps. Temperature ranges, precipitation, wind direction, and daylight hours are recorded because they affect movement and survival time. In cold environments, downhill routes and shelter opportunities are emphasized. In hot environments, water sources are marked. These decisions are visible on the map through highlighted streams, ridgelines, and known campsites. In some cases, maps include negative information. A note may indicate that a cliff band was checked with technical teams, or that a river section was swept without findings. These annotations are important because they prevent duplication of effort. They also remain long after the active search ends, preserved in case files. Across different parks and decades, the visual language of search maps remains consistent. A central point, expanding rings or grids, terrain features emphasized over human ones, and incremental updates. The map does not record confusion or doubt, it records coverage. When a search is suspended, the final version of the map shows a patchwork of completed areas surrounding an empty center where the person should have been. Public-facing versions of these maps are often simplified. Sensitive details may be removed, and exact coordinates may be generalized. Internally, however, the full versions remain precise. They are stored alongside radio logs, team assignments, and daily summaries. In later reviews, investigators and planners return to these maps to understand what decisions were made and why. The consistency of this process means that maps from different cases can be compared without commentary. A child lost in 1969, a long-distance hiker in 2013, and a solo backcountry visitor in 2020 are all represented using the same basic structure. The differences lie in scale and technology, not in method. What these maps show, without stating it directly, is the boundary between known and unknown. Each line marks where people have walked, flown, or scanned. Each blank space represents ground that remains unaccounted for, either because it was inaccessible at the time or because no reason existed to prioritize it. The map does not resolve that difference, it preserves it. The role of time and distance. In missing hiker cases, time is recorded before it is interpreted. Reports do not begin with urgency, they begin with clocks. A departure time is noted. A planned return time is added. The difference between those two moments becomes the first measurable gap. Everything else is arranged around it. Distance enters later, once movement is assumed. In official files, the initial concern usually arises when a person does not appear at a prearranged location. This may be a trailhead parking lot, a campsite, a shelter, or a residence. The person is not immediately labeled missing. The language used is overdue. That designation reflects uncertainty rather than alarm. It allows for late returns, changes in plan, or communication failures. The timestamp attached to this moment is important because it establishes when outside action became possible. In the case of Dennis Martin in 1969, the time gap was short. He disappeared during daylight hours, and the alarm was raised within minutes when he did not reappear. Park rangers were notified the same afternoon. The search log records times in blocks: when rangers arrived, when family members were interviewed, when organized teams began moving. The distance component at that stage was minimal. The assumption was proximity, and the map reflected that. Other cases involve longer delays. When Geraldine Largay did not reach a planned pickup point on the 22nd of July 2013, the first response was concern rather than certainty. It was not immediately clear whether she had chosen to camp elsewhere or changed her itinerary. The official missing report was filed later that day, and the search began that evening and continued the following morning. The time between her last confirmed sighting and the start of organized search activity was measured in hours, not minutes. That difference affected how distance was treated. Search and rescue guidelines recognize that time influences movement. The longer a person is unaccounted for, the wider the potential area becomes. This is not expressed as a theory in reports. It appears as an expansion of search zones. Early grids are tight, later ones grow outward. Distance is not guessed. It is bounded by terrain, physical ability, and documented travel rates. These factors are standard enough to appear in training materials, rather than narrative reports. In Mount Rainier National Park, timelines from recent missing hiker cases show how time constrains operations. Weather windows are tied to daylight hours. Helicopter flights are logged with start and end times. Ground teams are rotated based on shift limits. Each of these constraints affects how far a search can reach on a given day. The map shows this through coverage density rather than words. Areas close to the last known point may be searched repeatedly within short intervals. Farther areas may be scheduled for later or not at all if conditions change. Distance is also documented through negative findings. A report may note that a trail segment was walked end to end by a team during a specific time window. That segment is then marked complete for that day. If the missing person is not found there, the distance covered becomes part of the case record. Over time, these completed distances form a ring around the last known point. The absence of findings inside that ring becomes a fact, not a conclusion. Time delays are sometimes caused by ordinary decisions. A hiker may leave a phone behind to save weight. A family member may wait overnight before calling authorities, believing the person will return. In files, these choices are not judged. They are recorded. The delay is marked as a duration. That duration is then carried forward into search planning, affecting survivability estimates and resource allocation. When remains are found long after disappearance, timelines are reconstructed using physical evidence rather than memory. In the Lage case, journal entries and text messages that were never sent provided date markers. These entries showed that she remained alive for several weeks after she became lost. The distance between her campsite and the trail was later measured precisely. It was under 2 miles. That measurement did not change the earlier timeline. It clarified it. Distance in these cases is often counterintuitive. Files repeatedly show that missing individuals are found closer than expected, even after extensive searches. This is documented without emphasis. Investigators record the distance in miles or meters, then move on. The implication is left unstated. The number stands on its own. Time also appears in the form of suspension notices. When a search is scaled back or paused, the decision is logged with a date and time. Reasons may include weather, safety concerns, or lack of new information. These pauses are not endpoints, they are markers. Searches may be resumed weeks, months, or years later when conditions allow. The gap between active periods is another time measurement added to the file. Cold cases accumulate time differently. Updates may occur when new information is reported, when remains are discovered by chance, or when environmental changes expose areas previously inaccessible. Each update adds a new timestamp without removing the old ones. The record grows longer, not clearer. Distance measurements may be recalculated with better tools, but the original values remain preserved. Across jurisdictions, the treatment of time and distance is consistent. Whether the agency is a National Park Service, a state warden unit, or a county sheriff's office, the same basic elements appear. Dates are fixed. Distances are measured from known points. Changes are logged sequentially. There is no attempt to compress the timeline into a single explanation. In some reports, a brief quote captures the role of time in plain terms. A ranger may state that darkness, limited visibility, or that weather delayed aerial search. They explain why certain distances were not covered within certain hours. The map and the clock are linked in this way, one constraining the other. Over decades of cases, the same pattern emerges in documentation without being named. Early hours are dense with activity. Later days show broader but thinner coverage. As time extends, distance calculations become less central than confirmation of areas already searched. Eventually, the record becomes archival. Dates and distances fill the rest. Time does not resolve these cases. Distance does not either. They serve a different function. They define the limits of what was done and when it was done. Within those limits, everything else remains unrecorded. The documents do not attempt to fill that space. They mark its boundaries and leave it intact. Terrain that complicates movement. In search documentation, terrain is described before human behavior. Reports list elevation, slope angle, vegetation density, and water features early in the file. These elements are not background. They determine how a search is conducted and how movement is possible. The land is treated as an active condition rather than a setting. In Great Smoky Mountains National Park, internal summaries from the 1969 search for Dennis Martin repeatedly reference steep drainages descending from Spence Field. The ridge itself is broad and grassy, but the surrounding slopes fall sharply into forested ravines. Rangers noted that once a person moves downhill in this area, lateral travel becomes difficult due to rhododendron thickets and uneven ground. These observations were logged as physical facts, not as interpretations. They explained why search teams were assigned by drainage rather than by straight-line distance. Vegetation is often recorded in neutral but specific terms. In the Smokies file, undergrowth is described as dense and continuous. In later cases, similar language appears across regions. In Maine, reports related to Geraldine Largay describe thick conifer and mixed hardwood forest with limited sightlines. Ground teams noted that visibility could be reduced to a few feet, even in daylight. These descriptions were attached to grid notes, indicating how thoroughly an area could realistically be searched within a given time. Slope is treated mathematically. Search maps include contour lines and elevation change, and written reports reference grade percentages or general steepness. In Mount Rainier National Park, where terrain is more alpine, slopes are sometimes logged as hazardous or technical. During searches conducted there, rangers specify whether an area requires rope teams or whether it can be traversed safely on foot. These distinctions affect who can be sent where and how long coverage will take. Water features appear consistently across missing hiker cases. Creeks, rivers, and seasonal streams are highlighted early in search planning. This is documented practice. In the Dennis Martin search, teams were directed to follow creeks downhill because water naturally channels movement and sound. In later decades, this approach remains visible in search maps from different regions. Drainages are outlined in darker lines, and teams are assigned to walk along them in sequence. In Maine, the area where Largay was eventually found includes small streams and boggy ground. Official summaries note wet conditions and uneven footing. These features were not treated as unusual. They were part of the standard description of the forest. The campsite where she remained was on slightly elevated ground, surrounded by dense growth. That placement was documented after discovery through measurements and photographs, then added to the terrain record. Rock features are also logged without emphasis. In mountainous parks, cliffs, talus fields, and rock bands are marked as barriers or hazards. Searchers note whether these features are continuous or broken, climbable or impassable. In Mount Rainier case files, cliff bands are often marked as checked visually rather than physically traversed. This distinction matters because it defines the limits of direct search coverage. Weather interacts with terrain in predictable ways, and reports reflect this interaction. Snow alters slope conditions. Rain increases stream volume and changes footing. Fog reduces visibility on ridges. In the Smokies search, a storm moved through the area during early operations, increasing difficulty in lower elevations. This was recorded in daily logs alongside notes about trail conditions and ground saturation. The terrain did not change, but its effect on movement did. Trails themselves are treated as terrain features rather than guarantees of travel. Reports distinguish between maintained trails, faint paths, and off-trail areas. In Appalachian Trail cases, the trail corridor is clearly defined, but surrounding land quickly becomes trackless. Search summaries often note that once a person leaves the treadway, navigation becomes challenging even for experienced hikers. This is presented as a factual observation based on terrain complexity. In many files, there is mention of microterrain, a term used to describe small-scale features such as depressions, blowdowns, and vegetation walls. These features do not appear on standard maps but are encountered on the ground. Searchers document them when they significantly slow movement or obscure visibility. In Maine, fallen trees and tightly spaced saplings were noted in several grid reports. In Washington, volcanic debris and loose rock are mentioned in similar contexts. Terrain also determines sound travel. Reports sometimes note whether calling or whistle use was effective. Dense forest absorbs sound differently than open alpine areas. In the Smokies case, searchers reported limited sound carry in ravines. This observation was recorded to explain why auditory search methods had reduced effectiveness in certain zones. Importantly, terrain descriptions remain consistent across agencies and decades. A slope is steep regardless of who records it. Vegetation density does not change based on outcome. These descriptions appear almost interchangeable when placed side by side, even when the cases are unrelated. The repetition is not stylistic. It reflects the limited vocabulary available to describe physical landforms in operational terms. After a search ends or is suspended, terrain remains in the file as a static reference. When remains are later discovered, investigators compare the location to earlier terrain notes. In the Largay case, the final site was reviewed against prior grid descriptions. The The conclusion reached was narrow. The area was difficult to detect visually. That statement was supported by vegetation density and ground cover, both already documented. Terrain does not explain disappearance in these records. It explains effort. It explains speed. It explains why certain areas took longer to search or were searched differently. The files do not suggest that terrain causes events. They show that terrain shapes response. Across national parks, state forests, and long-distance trails, the same physical features recur. Forests thicken, water collects in channels, rock interrupts travel. These facts are recorded the same way whether the missing person is found or not. The land is described once and then referenced repeatedly, unchanged by time. By the time a case becomes archival, the terrain section often remains one of the most detailed parts of the file. Names and dates may be revisited, search strategies may be reviewed. The description of the ground itself usually stands as written. It does not age, it does not resolve, it simply remains. What personal items reveal and do not. When personal items are involved in a missing hiker case, they are handled as evidence rather than symbols. Reports describe them in simple terms: type, condition, location, and relation to the last known point. An item is logged because it exists, not because it suggests meaning. The file records what was found and where, then moves on. In many cases, no personal items are recovered during the initial search. This absence is noted briefly. Search summaries may state that no belongings were located, followed by a continuation of grid coverage. The lack of objects does not generate additional language. It becomes a fact like weather or terrain, fixed and unelaborated. When items are found, their documentation follows a consistent structure. Clothing is described by material and color. Equipment is identified by function. Notes and written material are transcribed or photographed. The distance from the last known point is measured. The surrounding terrain is described again, even if it has already appeared elsewhere in the file. During the 1969 search for Dennis Martin in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, several reported sightings of clothing were investigated. Rangers recorded these reports and physically checked the locations. Items that did not match Dennis's clothing were ruled out and documented as unrelated. No confirmed personal belongings belonging to the child were recovered during the search. This outcome was recorded without commentary. The absence remained part of the case record. In adult hiker cases, personal items sometimes appear later, separate from the initial search window. When Geraldine Largay's campsite was discovered in October 2015, investigators documented items present at the site in detail. These included a tent, a sleeping bag, a notebook, clothing, and personal effects. Each object was photographed and logged where it lay. The notebook contained dated entries and unsent text messages. These writings were transcribed and preserved as part of the official file. The presence of personal items at that site did not change the earlier search record. The campsite location was compared against previously searched grids. Investigators noted that the area had been searched, but the campsite was concealed by vegetation. This observation was supported by photographs and site measurements rather than inference. Personal items are often discovered by chance rather than during organized search operations. Hunters, hikers, or park staff performing unrelated tasks sometimes encounter equipment or remains years later. In such cases, the item becomes the starting point for a new phase of documentation. The original missing person report is reopened. The location is recorded using modern coordinates. The condition of the items is assessed in relation to environmental exposure. In Mount Rainier National Park and similar alpine environments, recovered items may include backpacks, climbing equipment, or clothing fragments. These are logged alongside elevation and slope data. If an item is found below a cliff band or near a glacier, that relationship is recorded spatially rather than narratively. The file does not state what the item implies, it states where it was. Condition is a key attribute. Clothing may be described as intact, torn, weathered, or scattered. Equipment may be described as functional or damaged. These descriptions are factual and limited. They allow investigators to determine whether the item was likely lost during movement, intentionally removed, or displaced by environmental forces. The report does not settle those questions. It preserves the observations that make later assessment possible. In some cases, items are found far from the last known point. When this occurs, distance is emphasized. Reports specify mileage and direction. The route between points is described in terrain terms. Waterways, slopes, and vegetation are noted. The item's location becomes another fixed coordinate added to the map. Personal electronics are treated differently from other belongings. Phones, GPS units, and watches are logged with serial numbers and battery condition. If data can be recovered, timestamps and location information are extracted and added to the timeline. In Lage's case, unsent text messages provided dates, but no transmission data. This information was logged as written content, not as communication. Food wrappers, packaging, and fuel canisters are sometimes recorded. These items indicate presence at a location, but not duration, unless dated. In reports, they are described briefly and photographed. Their discovery may prompt additional searching nearby, but the file reflects this as an operational decision rather than an interpretive one. There are cases in which personal items are misidentified. Clothing found in a search area may resemble that of the missing person, but belong to another visitor. These instances are documented carefully. The item is described, compared, and excluded. The exclusion is recorded, so the same item is not re-examined later. This process reduces ambiguity without adding narrative. When remains are discovered, associated items are catalogued together. The relationship between the body and the items is noted, worn, nearby, or scattered. This spatial relationship is important for forensic analysis, but the report itself remains restrained. Medical examiners provide cause and manner of death using standardized language. Personal items are listed as property rather than as evidence of experience. In cold cases, personal items may be the only physical connection remaining. A boot, a pack, or a piece of clothing may surface decades later due to erosion, animal activity, or human discovery. These finds are logged with the same structure as contemporary cases. The age of the item does not change the method of documentation. Across files from different jurisdictions, the treatment of personal items is notably consistent. Objects are handled as data points. They are fixed in place through coordinates and descriptions. They are linked to names through identification, not interpretation. The reports do not ask what the items meant to the person. They record how the items were encountered by others. What personal items reveal in these records is limited. They confirm presence. They establish location at a moment in time. They sometimes extend a timeline or shift a search boundary. What they do not reveal is intent, decision-making, or sequence of thought beyond what is explicitly written. The files do not attempt to bridge that gap. This restraint is deliberate. Official documentation avoids speculation because it must remain usable over time. New evidence may emerge years later. When it does, earlier item logs provide a stable reference. The description of a notebook, a jacket, or a tent does not change. In the end, personal items occupy a narrow role in missing hiker cases. They are neither explanatory nor incidental. They are concrete. They sit between the map and the timeline, adding detail without resolution. The reports leave them there, unchanged. Weather recorded without commentary. Weather enters missing hiker files as a set of measurements. Temperature ranges, precipitation, wind, and visibility are recorded alongside dates and times. These entries do not explain events, they define conditions. The information is usually taken from nearby stations, ranger observations, or aviation briefings. It is added because it constrains movement and operations, not because it tells a story. Daily search logs commonly begin with a brief weather line. A morning entry may note cloud cover, overnight lows, and expected changes. An afternoon update may add wind shifts or incoming front. The language remains functional. Words like clear, overcast, rain, and snow appear without modifiers. When conditions change, the change is logged with a timestamp. In Great Smoky Mountains National Park, during the June 1969 search for Dennis Martin, rangers recorded weather as part of the operational record. Notes indicate periods of rain and a storm system moving through the area during early search days. Temperatures were recorded within a typical summer range for the region. These entries appear in the same sections as team assignments and radio traffic. They are not isolated or emphasized. Weather records in that case include references to reduced visibility in ravines and along slopes following rainfall. The observation is practical. Wet ground affects footing. Rain limits sound, carry, and helicopter use. These effects are reflected in decisions noted elsewhere in the log, such as delayed flights or adjusted search routes. The weather entry itself remains brief. In long-distance trail cases, weather is tied to time windows rather than to narrative description. For Geraldine Lage's disappearance in July 2013, search summaries note summer conditions typical of western Maine. Daytime temperatures, nighttime lows, and rainfall are listed. When thunderstorms occurred, they are marked by date and duration. The effect on operations is recorded separately, usually as a pause or rescheduling of aerial activity. Visibility is often logged in relation to air support. Helicopter and fixed-wing flights depend on ceiling height and wind. In multiple cases, including searches in Mount Rainier National Park, daily briefings include aviation weather assessments. These notes specify whether conditions meet minimum requirements. When they do not, flights are cancelled or shortened. The reason is recorded as weather, without further elaboration. Snow appears in winter cases as a quantified condition. Depth, recent accumulation, and crust are noted. These details matter because they affect tracking and travel speed. In files from alpine parks, snow conditions are sometimes listed alongside avalanche forecasts. The entries are factual and short. They exist to define risk parameters for search teams. Rain is documented in similar fashion. Amounts may be estimated or taken from gauges. Prolonged rainfall is marked because it affects waterways. Increased stream flow is noted in drainage checks and water searches. These observations are operational. They indicate where teams can safely move and what methods are appropriate. The weather line itself does not speculate about consequences. Wind is recorded primarily for its impact on sound and aviation. Gusts are noted when they exceed certain thresholds. In open terrain, wind direction may be included because it affects drift and exposure. These notes appear in structured fields or short sentences. They do not introduce interpretation. Temperature entries are often simple ranges. Highs and lows are listed by day. In some cases, heat advisories or cold warnings are included when issued by authorities. These notices are copied into the file because they apply broadly to the area. The record does not connect them to individual outcome. Weather data may be updated multiple times in a single day. Morning conditions differ from afternoon ones. Evening logs note cooling and reduced light. Each update adds another time-stamped data point. Over the course of a search, these entries form a continuous environmental record that parallels search activity. In later reviews, weather logs serve as context rather than explanation. When remains are found months or years later, investigators refer back to recorded conditions to understand what teams faced at the time. The original entries remain unchanged. They are not rewritten to match outcomes. In cases where personal writings are recovered, weather sometimes appears there as well. Notes may mention rain, cold, or heat. These mentions are transcribed and preserved as written content. They are not merged with official weather data. Each source remains distinct, with its own time markers. Public statements about weather are often simplified. Press releases may say that weather hindered the search, or that conditions were challenging. Internally, the record is more specific. It lists wind speeds, snowfall, or fog duration. The difference reflects audience, not method. Weather records also include periods of normalcy. Many days are logged as clear or stable. These entries are important because they show when conditions did not limit operations. In search maps and logs, such days often correspond with expanded coverage. The weather entry itself remains the same length regardless of impact. Across jurisdictions, the structure of weather documentation is consistent. National parks, state agencies, and county offices use similar terminology. This consistency allows records from different regions to be compared directly. A fog delay in Washington is logged in the same way as a storm delay in Tennessee or Maine. In some cases, weather records include forecasts. Expected conditions are noted to plan the next operational period. These forecasts are time-limited. When conditions differ from predictions, the change is recorded. The forecast itself remains part of the file as a planning artifact. Weather can also determine when searches are suspended. Heavy snowfall, extreme heat, or sustained storms may prompt pauses. The decision is logged with a reason code or short explanation. The weather entry provides the supporting condition. The suspension notice records the administrative action. Over long timelines, weather entries accumulate without forming a narrative arc. They do not build toward resolution. They simply track the environment as it changes. When a case becomes archival, the weather section remains a chronological list of conditions encountered. What is absent from these records is interpretation. Weather is not assigned intent or causality. It is not described as hostile or benign. It is measured and logged. Its presence in the file is utilitarian. It defines what was possible at a given moment. The effect of this approach is a steady, parallel record. Names and dates change. Search areas expand and contract. Weather entries continue in the same format. They anchor the file to the physical world without explaining events within it. By the end of an active search, the weather log is complete for that period. It remains available for later reference. If new activity occurs, new entries are added. The earlier data is not revised. It stands as recorded, without commentary. Official language and its limits. In missing hiker cases, language is regulated by purpose. Reports are written to be shared across agencies, archived, and referenced later. The wording is standardized to reduce ambiguity. This standardization produces documents that are consistent across regions and decades. It also places limits on what can be said. Official reports rely on a restricted vocabulary. Terms such as last known point, overdue, search suspended, and remains located appear repeatedly. These phrases are not stylistic choices. They are operational markers. Each one signals a specific status change that triggers or ends a set of actions. The language is functional rather than descriptive. In the 1969 Dennis Martin case, National Park Service documentation used short declarative statements. Times were listed without qualifiers. Locations were named according to map features rather than narrative description. When search areas expanded, the reports stated that expansion occurred. They did not explain how it felt or what it suggested. The language remained fixed even as the scale of the operation grew. Press statements follow similar constraints. Agencies issue updates using language that mirrors internal terminology but removes sensitive detail. Phrases such as active search, no new information at this time, and efforts are ongoing are common. These statements are designed to inform without committing to interpretation. They provide status without analysis. In more recent cases, such as the 2013 disappearance of Geraldine Largay, official summaries released after the case was resolved maintained the same tone. The Maine Warden Service described the discovery of remains, the identification process, and the medical examiner's findings using clinical language. Cause of death was stated using standard categories. No attempt was made to reconstruct experience beyond what was physically documented. One effect of this language is uniformity. A report from a national park in Tennessee reads similarly to one from a state forest in Maine or a mountain park in Washington. The same sentence structures recur because they correspond to forms and templates. This uniformity allows quick understanding by trained readers. It also removes regional voice. The limits of official language become clear when gaps appear. Reports frequently state that no evidence was located or that the subject was not found. These phrases mark absence without elaboration. They do not speculate about why evidence is missing. They simply record that it is. The absence becomes part of the file in the same way presence does. Quotes included in reports are rare and controlled. When family members are quoted, it is usually to establish a factual detail, such as clothing worn or planned route. Emotional statements are excluded. When officials are quoted, the quotes restate operational facts or decisions. The purpose is clarity, not expression. In search logs, language is even more constrained. Entries may consist of fragments or shorthand. Team Alpha cleared Grid 3. Air Ops grounded due to fog. These entries are not intended for public reading. They exist to coordinate activity and preserve a record of actions taken. Their meaning depends on shared training rather than narrative explanation. The same limits apply to after-action reports. These documents review what was done, when it was done, and what resources were used. They may note challenges such as terrain or weather. They do not assign cause to outcomes unless supported by direct evidence. Recommendations, when present, focus on procedure rather than interpretation. In cold cases, language becomes more archival. Updates may be brief and infrequent. A single paragraph may be added to note that remains were discovered or identified. The wording connects the new information to the existing file without revising earlier entries. The structure remains intact. Official language also avoids conditional phrasing. Reports do not say what might have happened. They state what was confirmed. If uncertainty exists, it is expressed through terms like unknown or undetermined. These terms have specific meanings within investigative context. They indicate the absence of sufficient information, not the presence of multiple possibilities. This restraint can appear incomplete to outside readers. Members of the public may expect explanation where the file offers only description. The documents do not fill that gap. They are not designed to. Their purpose is to record actions and findings in a way that remains usable regardless of later developments. In some cases, language shifts slightly when jurisdiction changes. A county sheriff's report may differ in formatting from a national park summary. However, the core terminology remains consistent. This consistency allows agencies to share information without translation. It also ensures that records can be compared across cases. Medical examiner reports illustrate another boundary. Cause and manner of death are stated using standardized categories. Additional details may be included in technical sections, but the summary language remains brief. Personal history or circumstance is excluded unless directly relevant to the determination. The report focuses on physical findings. Official language also shapes timelines. Events are recorded in chronological order without emphasis. A significant delay and a routine interval may receive the same sentence length. The importance of an event is implied by its placement, not by descriptive weight. This approach keeps the record even, but can obscure perceived significance. When searches are suspended, the language used is administrative. Search, suspended, pending new information. This phrase appears in many files. It indicates a pause, not an end. The wording leaves room for resumption without suggesting expectation. It is a status label rather than a conclusion. The limits of official language are most evident when later discoveries occur. When remains are found years after a disappearance, the original reports are not rewritten. New documents are appended. The language of the original search remains as it was, even if later information casts it in a different light. This separation preserves the integrity of the record. Across all these documents, one pattern holds. Official language records what can be verified and avoids what cannot. It does not attempt to bridge uncertainty. It marks it. The result is a collection of files that are clear in structure but narrow in scope. This narrowness is intentional. It allows records to function over long periods and across changing personnel. It also means that some aspects of missing hiker cases remain outside the written file. The documents do not claim completeness. They claim accuracy within defined limits. Those limits do not vary with outcome. A case resolved quickly and a case unresolved for decades are documented using the same framework. The difference lies in length and in the number of appended updates, not in tone or vocabulary. In reviewing multiple cases side by side, the effect of this language becomes apparent. The files resemble each other closely, even when the circumstances differ. The sameness is not evidence of connection. It is evidence of method. Official language, by design, leaves much unaddressed. It establishes boundaries around what is known and what was done. Inside those boundaries, the record is precise. Outside them, it remains silent. Patterns noted only afterward. Individual missing hiker cases are documented as separate events. Each file is opened, managed, and closed on its own terms. Agencies do not group cases during active operations unless there is a direct and verified connection. As a result, similarities between cases are not identified at the time they occur. They become visible only later, when records are reviewed side by side. This later comparison usually happens for administrative or research purposes. Park services periodically review past incidents to assess staffing needs, response times, and procedural effectiveness. State agencies compile statistics for training. Independent researchers and journalists also examine public records. In these contexts, multiple files are placed in sequence, and repeated features become noticeable through accumulation rather than intention. One recurring feature is the time of day associated with last confirmed sightings. Across many documented cases, individuals are last seen during daylight hours, often late morning or early afternoon. This information appears in files without emphasis. It is logged because time is required. Only when multiple reports are read together does the repetition become apparent. Another repeated element is the short distance between the last known point and the eventual discovery location when a discovery occurs. In several resolved cases, remains or campsites were found within a few miles of the trail or known route. This distance is recorded numerically in each file. It is not highlighted as unusual. The similarity emerges only when distances from multiple cases are compared. The manner in which individuals separate from companions also appears repeatedly in documentation. Files describe brief separations for ordinary reasons, stepping ahead on a trail, stopping to rest, leaving the path momentarily, or attending to personal needs. These descriptions are factual and brief. They establish circumstances, not significance. When many such files are reviewed together, the similarity of these moments becomes evident. Search duration is another point of overlap. Records show that intensive search activity often occurs within the first few days, followed by reduced operations if no evidence is found. This pattern is procedural. It reflects resource management rather than case-specific reasoning. The same sequence appears in files from different decades and jurisdictions. Weather conditions recorded at the time of disappearance also show repetition when examined collectively. Many cases occur under stable or unremarkable weather. Clear skies, moderate temperatures, and normal seasonal conditions are common entries. This information is logged without interpretation. The similarity becomes visible only through later aggregation. Terrain descriptions likewise repeat across files. Dense forest, steep slopes, and drainage systems appear frequently in search documentation. Each report describes the local environment. The repetition of these features across regions is not noted in individual cases. It becomes noticeable when terrain sections from multiple files are read consecutively. The structure of reports contributes to this delayed recognition. Because files follow standardized formats, comparable information appears in the same relative position in each document. Last known point descriptions, weather logs, terrain notes, and search summaries are consistently placed. This uniformity makes later comparison possible but does not encourage it during active investigations. In some cases, similarities are identified during internal reviews. After-action reports may note that certain challenges recur, such as limited visibility in dense vegetation or delayed alerts due to communication gaps. These observations are framed as operational lessons rather than as case connections. They address response effectiveness, not underlying causes. Public attention sometimes accelerates pattern recognition. When media outlets report on multiple missing hiker cases within a region, similarities may be mentioned. These accounts often rely on publicly available data, dates, locations, ages, and circumstances. Agencies generally respond by restating that cases are independent unless evidence indicates otherwise. The official files remain unchanged. Databases such as NamUs and state missing person registries enable broader comparison by centralizing information. These systems allow users to filter cases by date range, location type, or demographic factors. The data fields are standardized, which supports comparison. However, the databases do not interpret the data, they present it. In some instances, researchers have compiled timelines showing clusters of disappearances within certain parks or regions. These compilations draw from official records. The records themselves do not label events as clusters. They list each case separately. The cluster exists only in the comparative view. It is important to note that differences are also present and recorded. Ages vary widely. Experience levels differ. Some individuals are found quickly, others are not found at all. These differences are as clearly documented as similarities. Later analysis must account for both. Using the same factual entries, the absence of certain details also becomes noticeable in comparison. Many files lack precise information about movement after the last known point. This absence is consistent across cases. It reflects the limits of observation rather than a shared circumstance. The gap itself becomes a shared feature of the documentation. Language plays a role in delayed pattern recognition. Because official wording avoids interpretation, it does not draw attention to repetition. Phrases remain neutral and procedural. This neutrality prevents emphasis. It also prevents early pattern labeling. When remains are discovered years later, comparisons sometimes extend across time. Investigators may review earlier cases to assess whether search methods have changed or improved. Similarities in outcomes are noted as part of procedural evaluation. These notes remain internal and focused on response, not on event linkage. Training materials occasionally reference past cases as examples. These references highlight specific operational points, such as the importance of rapid grid assignment or the challenges of aerial visibility in forested areas. The cases are not presented as part of a pattern of disappearances. They are used individually to illustrate response considerations. The recognition of similarity, therefore, depends on distance from the event. Temporal distance allows records to be viewed together. Without that distance, each case remains self-contained. What emerges from later review is not a unified explanation, but a set of repeated recorded elements. Times align, distances recur, terrain descriptions resemble one another. The files themselves do not comment on this. They provide the raw material that makes observation possible. This process is cumulative. Each new case adds another data point with the same categories filled in. Over years and decades, the accumulation allows comparison. The records do not change their tone or structure in response. They continue to log facts as they occur. Patterns, in this context, are not declared. They are observed after the fact by those who place documents side by side. The official record neither promotes nor resists this observation. it remains focused on individual documentation. The result is a body of material that can be read in two ways. Singly, each file describes one disappearance. Collectively, they reveal repetition in how events are recorded and in what is recorded. The distinction between these views lies outside the files themselves. Cases that do not fit the majority. Most missing hiker cases align closely with established documentation patterns. A person is reported overdue, a last known point is identified, and search activity proceeds outward within a defined probability area. Time frames, terrain, and weather are logged in predictable ways. Outcomes, when they occur, usually fall within expected distances or durations. A smaller number of cases diverges from these expectations in ways that are fully documented but not emphasized within the records themselves. One form of divergence involves distance. In some documented cases, individuals are ultimately located far beyond the initial probability area defined by search planners. Official records note these distances precisely, using measured mileage and mapped terrain routes. The deviation appears numerically rather than narratively. The file records that the person was found several miles from the last known point, sometimes across ridgelines or through difficult terrain, without explaining how that distance was traveled. The fact of distance stands alone in the record. Another departure appears in duration. Some missing persons remain alive for extended periods after their disappearance, as confirmed later through recovered writings, timestamps, or forensic findings. These survival periods may extend days or weeks beyond what early search timelines assumed. The documentation records survival length through dated material or medical assessment. The original search timeline remains unchanged. The divergence is visible only when later evidence is added to the file. There are also cases in which individuals are located within areas that had already been searched and marked as cleared. Search maps and grid logs show that coverage occurred. Later discovery is documented with exact coordinates in comparison to earlier search zones. The record holds both facts simultaneously. The area was searched, and the individual was later found there. No reconciliation is offered. The deviation exists spatially within the documented record. Some cases differ because no personal items are recovered during search operations, even after extensive coverage. Files note the absence of clothing, equipment, or other trace. This absence is recorded briefly and consistently. When a case remains unresolved, the lack of physical evidence becomes one of its defining documented characteristics, though it is not described as unusual within the file. Another category involves cases where the last known point cannot be precisely established. In these instances, reports use qualifiers such as approximate or believed to be. Search maps begin broader than usual, covering multiple possible starting locations. The divergence lies in initial uncertainty rather than later outcome. This uncertainty is recorded factually through wider grids and expanded early coverage. Children's cases sometimes diverge from common assumptions about movement. In some resolved cases, post-recovery analysis shows that children traveled uphill, crossed ridges, or moved away from water sources. These movements are documented after discovery, using measured distances and terrain descriptions. The deviation appears in reconstructed routes rather than in the initial disappearance report. Environmental context can also produce divergence. In desert regions, extreme heat limits search operations to narrow time windows. Official logs record temperature readings, heat advisories, and adjusted schedules. In these cases, the deviation is operational. Search coverage differs from forest or alpine environments because of safety constraints, and the documentation reflects those constraints directly. Similarly, in alpine environments, snow, ice, and avalanche risk alter search patterns. Records show that certain areas are inaccessible during specific periods. When remains or evidence are later discovered after seasonal changes, the file includes both the earlier limitation and the later discovery. The deviation lies in timing rather than method. Some cases diverge through rapid resolution. Individuals may be found deceased or alive within hours of being reported missing, sometimes in visible locations near trails or facilities. These files are brief. They contain fewer entries, but follow the same documentation structure. The difference is duration, not process. Other cases diverge by remaining unresolved for decades. These files become static after initial activity ends. Periodic administrative reviews are logged, often stating that no new information has been received. Over time, the lack of change becomes a defining feature of the record. The file remains open or archived without resolution. In certain cases, recovery occurs long after search suspension due to unrelated human activity or environmental change. Hunters, hikers, park staff, or erosion may expose remains or items years later. When this happens, the discovery is documented as a new event appended to the original file. The original search documentation is not revised. The divergence appears as a long temporal gap between disappearance and recovery. There are also cases where individuals are located alive after extended periods without contact. Recovery documentation focuses on condition, location, and medical assessment. Statements from the individual may be summarized to establish movement or duration. These summaries are factual and limited. The deviation lies in outcome rather than documentation style. Some divergences relate to infrastructure. Disappearances occurring near popular trails, camps, or facilities differ from those in remote backcountry only in expectation, not in documentation. Records note trail use levels or proximity to developed areas as logistical details. When outcomes do not align with expectations, the file does not address the contrast. It records the facts as they occurred. Across all these cases, the key point is that divergence is not labeled. Files do not classify cases as typical or atypical. They do not flag anomalies. They record data fields consistently. Differences emerge only when those fields are compared across many records. The structure of documentation contributes to this effect. Because reports follow standardized formats, comparable information appears in the same sections of each file. Last known point, time, distance, terrain, weather, and outcome are always present. When one of these fields contains values outside the common range, the deviation becomes visible through comparison rather than commentary. Importantly, differences are preserved rather than resolved. The record does not attempt to explain why a person was found farther away, survived longer, or remained undiscovered. It does not reconcile overlapping facts. It holds them. These cases do not alter how future cases are documented. Agencies do not adjust templates or language based on exception. Each new report begins with the same assumptions and structure. The system prioritizes consistency and clarity over adaptation. As a result, cases that do not fit the majority remain embedded within the same archival framework as all others. They are neither highlighted nor obscured. They exist as part of the overall record, distinguishable only through careful reading of factual entries. The divergence, then, is not narrative. It is numerical, spatial, or temporal. It appears in distances, durations, and locations. It does not change the tone or language of the file. By preserving these differences without interpretation, the records allow later readers to observe variation without being directed toward explanation. The documentation remains neutral, even when outcomes differ widely. What stands out, finally, is that these cases do not disrupt the system that records them. They pass through it in the same way as all others. The differences remain contained within the facts themselves. How cases are closed or left open. The status of a missing hiker case is determined through administrative procedure rather than narrative judgment. Each file moves through defined stages based on documented actions and verified information. These stages are applied consistently across agencies and jurisdictions. A case begins when a report is formally accepted. At this point, the individual is often described as overdue. This term reflects uncertainty rather than conclusion. It indicates that a planned return did not occur as expected. The timestamp attached to this designation becomes part of the permanent record. From that moment forward, all actions are logged in relation to it. An active case is defined by ongoing operations. Search teams are deployed. Logs are created daily or by shift. These logs record assignments, coverage areas, weather conditions, and communications. The case remains active as long as organized effort continues. The file does not assess progress. It records activity. When active operations end without discovery, the case status changes. The most common term used is suspended. This change is documented with a date and a brief statement explaining that search efforts have been paused. The wording does not indicate finality. It leaves open the possibility of future action. The suspension reflects resource limits, safety considerations, or the absence of new information. Suspension does not remove a case from record systems. Files remain open and accessible. They may be reviewed periodically or reactivated if new information emerges. The suspended status functions as an administrative pause rather than a conclusion. This distinction is maintained carefully in documentation. Closure is a separate designation. A case is closed when specific criteria are met. One criterion is confirmed recovery of the missing person alive. In such cases, the file is updated with recovery details, including location, time, and condition. A medical evaluation may be noted, if applicable. The administrative status is then marked closed. The closure entry is brief and factual. Another criterion for closure is confirmed identification of remains. When remains are discovered and positively identified, the case status changes from missing to deceased. The file records the discovery date, identification process, and official determination of cause and manner of death as provided by a medical examiner or coroner. The closure date corresponds to confirmation, not to the initial disappearance. Some cases are closed without physical recovery. This occurs when sufficient verified evidence establishes resolution through other means. Such determinations are rare in wilderness contexts and are documented carefully. The file includes the basis for closure, referencing official findings or legal determinations. Language remains precise and limited to what can be confirmed. Jurisdiction plays a role in closure authority. When multiple agencies are involved, one retains primary responsibility. That agency determines status changes. Supporting agencies document their participation, but do not close the case independently. This hierarchy is recorded in administrative notes. Case files may also be transferred. If responsibility shifts due to jurisdictional boundaries or legal considerations, the transfer is documented. The receiving agency assumes control of the file. Status labels remain intact during transfer. The continuity of the record is preserved. Cases that remain unresolved after suspension enter a long-term state. Some agencies conduct periodic administrative reviews. These reviews are logged with dates and brief notes stating whether new information was obtained. Often, the entry indicates that no updates are available. The repetition of these entries reflects policy rather than progress. National databases mirror these administrative states. When cases are entered into centralized systems, their status reflects the reporting agency's designation. Updates occur when the agency changes the status. The database does not reinterpret the case. It records the administrative decision. Family notification is part of status change procedure. When a case is suspended, closed, or reopened, agencies document that next of kin were informed. The record notes the date and method of contact. It does not transcribe conversations. This practice appears consistently across files. Reopening a case follows defined triggers. New evidence, discovery of remains, credible sightings, or technological advances may prompt review. When reopened, the file records the reason and date. The status changes back to active. Earlier entries remain unchanged. The file grows by addition rather than revision. Archived cases retain their original structure. Archiving indicates that no active work is ongoing, not that the case is resolved. Archived files remain accessible for future reference, legal inquiry, or research. The archival status is administrative and reversible. Terminology varies slightly between agencies, but meanings align. Some use inactive instead of suspended. Others distinguish between closed and administratively closed. Policy documents define these terms internally. The case file reflects the agency's chosen language along with dates and authority. Older cases sometimes display different wording due to historical standards. Despite this, the functional stages remain recognizable. Activity begins, changes, and ends according to documented triggers. The language marks these transitions clearly, even when phrasing differs. One consistent feature is the separation between administrative status and outcome. A case may be administratively closed without resolution. It may remain open despite long inactivity. The documentation preserves this distinction explicitly. Status labels indicate process, not certainty. Closure entries do not summarize the case. They do not assess search effectiveness or explain outcomes. They state that a status change occurred and why it was permitted under policy. The remainder of the file remains intact and unaltered. This approach ensures long-term usability. If new information appears years later, earlier documentation remains reliable. The record shows what was known at each stage and what actions were taken. It does not retroactively adjust to fit later discoveries. The result is a layered record. Early logs show dense activity. Later entries may be sparse. Administrative notes mark transitions. Over time, the file becomes a chronological trace of decisions rather than events. Cases left open indefinitely demonstrate this structure most clearly. They accumulate little new information, Periodic reviews add dated entries stating continuity of status. The absence of change becomes part of the record. This administrative clarity allows cases to persist without reinterpretation. Files can remain unresolved without being ambiguous in status. Each state is defined. Each transition is logged. Across many years and many jurisdictions, the same framework appears. Activity begins, may pause, may resume, and may end. The language used to mark each phase remains consistent and restrained. What this system prioritizes is record integrity. It ensures that future readers can see exactly when actions occurred and why status changed. It avoids narrative closure when factual closure is not available. In this way, cases are either closed or left open through procedure rather than explanation. The documentation reflects that choice. It records the limits of action without exceeding them. What remains in the record? Once a missing hiker case moves out of active status, the record does not disappear. It changes function. The file shifts from a working document to an archival one. What remains is defined by policy, storage practices, and the limits of what was recorded at the time. The record does not grow unless new information is added. It does not compress or summarize itself. It stays as it was left. Archived case files usually retain their original structure. Initial reports remain at the front. Search logs follow in chronological order. Maps, weather logs, and administrative status changes are preserved as separate sections. Later additions, if any, are appended rather than integrated. This preserves the sequence of knowledge as it existed over time. Certain details remain stable across decades. Names, dates, locations, and last known points are rarely altered once entered. These elements form the core identifiers of the case. Even if mapping technology improves or place names change, the original references are preserved alongside any updates. The file shows both, rather than replacing one with the other. Search maps are often retained in their final operational form. These maps show coverage areas, grid boundaries, and marked locations. Handwritten annotations, when present, are preserved through scanning or photography. The map reflects what searchers knew and did, not what was later learned. Narrative detail does not accumulate with time. If a case remains unresolved, no additional explanation is added to fill gaps. The absence of information is preserved as absence. Periodic reviews may add a short entry stating that no new leads were developed. These entries confirm continuity rather than progress. Evidence inventories remain fixed. Lists of personal items recovered, if any, do not change unless new items are found. If no items were recovered, that fact remains unchanged. The record does not revisit the absence, it simply retains it. Weather logs remain as recorded. They are not reinterpreted or expanded. Later understanding of conditions does not alter earlier entries. The weather section exists as a parallel environmental record tied to specific dates and times. Witness statements, when included, remain in their original form. They are not edited for clarity or consistency after the fact. If contradictions exist between statements, both are retained. The record does not resolve them. It preserves them as part of the factual landscape. Administrative notes persist clearly. Status changes, suspensions, closures, and reopenings are all marked with dates and authority. These notes remain among the most visible elements of long-term files because they show that the case was acted upon, even when outcomes were limited. What often fades from the record is context. Informal discussions, assumptions made in the field, and decisions not written down do not survive. The file contains only what was formally recorded. This creates a narrowing over time. The case becomes defined by what was documented rather than by what was experienced. Personnel names may remain, but institutional memory does not. Rangers, deputies, and coordinators move on. Their reasoning is preserved only if it was written. The record does not capture intuition or uncertainty unless it was formally logged. Media coverage is usually not part of the official file. Press articles may reference the case, but they are not typically archived with operational documents. The official record remains separate from public narrative. Over time, this can create divergence between what is remembered publicly and what is preserved administratively. In some cases, records are transferred between storage systems. Paper files may be digitized. Digital files may be migrated to new databases. During these transitions, formatting may change, but content is retained. The goal is preservation rather than reinterpretation. Legal retention policies influence what remains. Some jurisdictions retain files indefinitely, others archive them under specific conditions. Even when files are archived off-site or moved to restricted access, their internal content remains intact. Removal of material is rare and usually documented if it occurs. In resolved cases, the record often ends abruptly. Once identification or recovery is confirmed and closure is recorded, no further narrative is added. The file does not reflect on resolution, it records that it occurred. In unresolved cases, the record may span decades without substantial addition. The early pages remain the most detailed. Later pages, if present, are administrative. This imbalance becomes a defining feature of long-term missing hiker files. What persists most clearly is structure. Even when content is minimal, the framework remains visible. Last known point, search activity, status changes, and final disposition are always present. This consistency allows cases to be reviewed long after active involvement ends. The record does not age evenly. Early urgency produces dense documentation. Later years produce little. The contrast is visible but unremarked. The file does not comment on its own silence. When new discoveries occur years later, the original record is not rewritten. A new section is added. The old material remains unchanged. The record becomes layered rather than corrected. This approach ensures that the file reflects knowledge as it existed at each moment. It does not smooth inconsistencies or resolve gaps. It preserves them. For researchers, agencies, or families reviewing these files later, what remains is a factual trace rather than a narrative. It shows what was known, what was done, and when action stopped or resumed. It does not explain outcomes beyond what can be verified. In this way, missing hiker records function less as stories and more as timelines bounded by documentation. They endure because they are not shaped to conclude. They remain open to addition, even when no addition occurs. The persistence of these records is administrative, not emotional. They exist because policy requires them to exist. Their content reflects what policy allowed to be written. What remains, ultimately, is the boundary of knowledge. The record marks that boundary clearly and then stops. When records are compared side by side, when missing hiker files are examined individually, they present as closed systems. Each file contains its own names, dates, maps, and administrative notes. Nothing within a single record points outward. The structure encourages isolation. Only when multiple records are placed together does comparison become possible, and even then, the comparison relies entirely on what has already been documented. Side-by-side review usually occurs long after active involvement has